There was a time when science and poetry were one, and its name was magic. These words from an unknown source serve as a fitting introduction to this presentation. It is time to bring science and poetry together again, to rekindle the magic, to reawaken our forgotten sense of kinship with all living things. It is time to rediscover ourselves in nature. My background is in medicine and psychiatry. Central to my work is the task of helping my patients to come to know themselves a little better, to recognize their own contributions towards their suffering, and most challenging of all, to assist in the discovery of a voice, an authority that is natural to them. Honest self-examination, however, is not confined to the consulting room. I have had the privilege of having lived and worked in some of the most beautiful and remote wildlife areas in southern Africa. It has been a learning journey. Yes, I've learned much from my patients, but I have learned even more from the wild. I have learned that the identity that you and I seek for ourselves as individuals is impossible to define outside of our relationships. Not only human to human, but to the animals, to the landscapes, to the forests, the oceans, the rivers in our lives. Who and what would we be without them? Listen to this poem. The wind one brilliant day called to my soul with the odor of jasmine. In exchange for the odor of my jasmine, I would like the odor of your roses. But all the flowers in my garden are dead. Well then, I will take the yellow leaves and the withered petals and the waters from your fountain. And the wind left, and my soul wept and said, what have you done with the garden that was entrusted to you? In this powerful poem by Antonio Machado, we all know exactly who he is speaking to. What have you done with the garden? Let's put this question into perspective. This iconic photograph of the Earth rising up above the moon was taken by the American astronaut William Anders on December the 24th, 1968. It was a memory that deeply influenced the lives of Anders, as well as those of his fellow Apollo 8 astronauts, James Lovell and Frank Borman. In a profoundly poetic response, Anders had this to say: we came all the way to the moon to discover the Earth. James Lovell's response was equally poetic. From this distance, you can hide the Earth behind your thumb. Everything you have ever known of the Earth is behind your thumb. What a beautiful first line for a poem. And yet, we all know that things are not well behind that thumb. In the nearly 50 years since this picture was taken, half of the world's wetlands, peat beds, and tropical rainforests have been destroyed. In the wake of accelerated warming, 400,000 square kilometers of Arctic sea ice has disappeared. The world human population has doubled, while that of our wild mammals, amphibians, reptiles, and fish has halved. Africa's iconic elephants are dying at a rate of one animal every 5 hours for their ivory. And as for our critically endangered rhinoceros, one animal is poached every 8 hours for its horn. What on earth are we doing? If we can hide the earth behind our thumb, what on earth are we hiding from ourselves? It is this. We are in the grips of an ecological amnesia. Simply put, we have forgotten where we have come from. Psychologically disconnected from our wild origins and from the elements, a predictable human behavioral process emerges. That which we cannot understand or embrace, we either belittle or we fear. And that which we fear, we inevitably destroy. Now, deep down, you and I know that we have to live differently. But could it be that we don't want to know? The scientific message, and with it, human accountability, is for many too depressing, too inconvenient, and for some too late. I refuse to accept these excuses. If we no longer hear the warning calls of science, then the only voice left that we can listen to and turn to belongs to the poets. I agree with Walt Whitman. Listen to these words from his poem, A Passage to India. After the seas are all crossed, as they already seem crossed, after the great captains and engineers have accomplished their work, after the noble inventors, the scientists, geologists, chemists, ethnologists, finally shall come the poet. Finally shall come the poet. Finally shall come those who speak for science and soul, who narrow the gap between subject and object, individuals whose lives and language rhyme with the two most powerful words in the vocabulary of the human species, yes and no. Individuals who say no to the madness of what we are doing to the land, to the sea, and to ourselves. Yes to those who come in the name of healing. Finally shall come those who speak with anger, beauty, outrage, care, and compassion, all in the same breath. Only poetry can do that. Poetry tells the truth, but as Emily Dickinson insists, we have to tell it slant. Poetry is, after all, a language of protest, but it is also a language of hope. It is, in its essence, self-examining. I wrote this poem in 1998. Have we forgotten that wilderness is not a place, but a pattern of stars? Have we forgotten that wilderness is not a place, but a pattern of soul where every bird and beast is a soul maker? Have we forgotten that wilderness is not a place, but a moving feast of stars, footprints, scales, beginnings? Since when did we become afraid of the night and that only the bright stars count? Or that our moon is not a moon unless it is full? By whose command were the animals, through groping fingers, one for each hand, reduced to the big and the little five? Have we forgotten that every creature is within us, carried by tides of earthly blood, and that we named them? Have we forgotten that wilderness is not a place, but a season, and that we are in its final hour? Now, I believe there's a poet in every single human being. And by this, I do not mean a talent restricted to the written composition of rhyme and verse. On the contrary, it is a force. A creative instinct once awakened naturally rhymes with the elements. It is that untamable voice of your soul, that part of you that knows without having been taught or advised that behind your and my thumb is the entire history of life on earth, that we are connected, that we belong. Now, this is the science. It is the poet in us who asks the questions like, who looks at who? Look, listen. Genetically bound to every living thing, do you know that every mammal has more than 90% of the human genome. Every bird and reptile has more than 80%. Insects in excess of 40%. And as for the trees and plants, between 5 and 24% of the human genome. We are the human animal. What a privilege! What a responsibility! Now, this is the science. Here is the poetry. Written in 1918, long before the unraveling of the human genome, the American poet Carl Sandburg put together these beautiful words. Listen for the magic. There's a wolf in me, fangs pointed for tearing gashes, and a red tongue for the hot lapping of blood. The wilderness gave it to me, and the wilderness will not let it go. There's a fox in me, a silver grey. I guess, I sniff things out of the wind and air. I circle, and I loop, and I double-cross, and the wilderness told me so. There's a hog in me, and a fish, I know. I come from salt blue water gates. I scurried with shoals of herrings. I blew water spouts with whales and porpoises, long before land, long before Noah, long before that first chapter in Genesis. There's a baboon in me, and an owl, and an eagle, and a mockingbird, and I keep them because the wilderness said so. I have a menagerie beneath my ribs and under my bony skull and within my red valve heart. And I've got something else. It is a man-child heart, a woman-child heart, a father and a mother and a lover that comes from God knows where. It goes to God knows where. But I am the keeper of the zoo. I say yes and no. I am a pal of the world, and I come from the wilderness. Magic. And so, in search of a renewed sense of sanity, I have turned to the animals, and in this instance, to the elephants. In 2012, following ancient elephant migration routes and clusters, my close friend Ian McCallum and I undertook a 5,000-kilometer journey through southern Africa. There were various objectives for this initiative, but the underlying message was this: if we cannot protect or look after something this big, how on earth are we going to look after the little things? And so, with the assistance of a competent backup team, we walked and we cycled and we kayaked across the continent. Along the way, we met with indigenous communities like the Himba, the Bushmen, and it was not that difficult to draw a parallel between their future way of life and that of the animals. 125 days later, physically exhausted, with much to digest, I asked myself this question: what is it that I would most want to share with others? It was this: if those Apollo astronauts went all the way to the moon to discover the Earth, I journeyed into the heart of southern Africa to discover a new perspective on the future of human coexistence with the wild. It came in the form of a concept of keystone species. A keystone species is an animal, an organism that is essential for the integrity of the ecosystems. The word keystone itself describes that wedge-shaped stone at the top of an arch. Remove that stone and the arch collapses. It is a powerful metaphor. Elephants, termites, bees are a keystone species. Now, to get a grasp of the bigger picture, it is important that you learn how to understand shit just a little differently. Take elephant dung, for example. The moisture in elephant dung is often, in the dry season, the sole source of water for countless species of butterflies, moths, and insects. The undigested food, the seeds, the grasses, is food for baboons, birds and beetles, and the list goes on. And lest we forget, elephants, in spite of the impact on trees, are traditionally Africa's greatest tree planters. And so, I have a question. Are human beings a keystone species? The answer is a categorical no. If we were to disappear tonight, nothing would miss us. Nothing. The Earth's ecosystems would be better off without us. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel sad about that prognosis. There is something in me that says no, and I would hope there's something in you that feels the same, and hence this challenge. If we are not a keystone species, do you have it in you to be a keystone individual? Someone who makes a difference to the lives of others, to the earth, to the animals? Someone who is willing to be disturbed, to find your voice, to stand firm in the persuasion that there are some things worth fighting for, some things that are simply not for sale? They're in this audience. But please know there are many out there in the world already doing the work, poets of the earth, men and women who in their own way say yes and no, individuals who, through their courage, their commitment, and their conversations, bring hope, not the belief that everything will turn out well, but a consciousness that can redefine our sense of history, sense of nature, and our sense of stewardship. Take another look at the moon and the earth. This earth rising above the moon. It is a miracle, it is a gift, and it is a garden. It has a soul. It has something to do with you and me. Why? Because our signature is on that earth, and it is all about time. Listen. One day, your soul will call to you with a holy rage. Rise up, it will say. Stand up inside your own skin. Unmask your unlived life. Feast on your animal heart. Unfasten your fist. Let loose the medicines from your own hand. Show me the lines. I will show you the spoor of the ancestors. Show me the creases. I will show you the way to water. Show me the folds, and I will show you the furrows for your healing. Look, it will say, the line of life has 4 paths. One with a mirror, one with a mask, one with a fist, and one with a heart. One day, your soul will call to you with a holy rage. Thank you. Thank you.